Welcome to Going Down the Line. I'm Stephen from Virginia,
And I'm Chase Gilmer.
and we're bringing you a new Baylor podcast, video feed, and audio feed of Going Down the Line.
All right, let's get started.
Let's get started. All right, we're going to start out by talking about our expectations for the Bears this year and what we're looking for in the season. Chase, what are you looking for from the Bears this season?
So for me, we could spend so much time talking about how the running back room does without Dawson Pendergrass, which don't get me wrong, that's a very big loss for Baylor, or how the secondary does this season. But for me personally, the thing that I'm looking forward to this season is how this team fares against a very tough schedule. Baylor is one of two Power Four conferences or conference teams that's facing off against 11 Power Four conference opponents, which ironically the other one is TCU. And it's not just the fact that they're facing 11 P4 schools, it's the fact that most of them are pretty tough because we're talking about the very first game is against Auburn. I mean, they should be very improved this year. So that's going to be a tough game. Second game is against SMU at SMU. And even though they might take a step back this season because they lost a good amount of talent on defense, they're still going to be a contender for the ACC. Fourth game, the very first conference game, is against Arizona State, the reigning Big 12 champs. They're going to be really good this year. And then you've got games against Kansas State at home, which obviously I know that they didn't do well in their first game in Ireland, but I still think they're still going to be pretty good this year. And then you got games at TCU. You've got what I would consider the big trap game is at Cincinnati, and then you know, even you can't really look over Houston or UCF or Arizona. So yeah, I mean, this is a very tough schedule this year that, if Baylor does really well this year, I think that propels Dave Aranda up the totem pole when it comes to head coaching rankings.
Yeah, and I really want to piggyback off that and say that I'm looking for Baylor to start fast early in the season because, like you said, the schedule is really tough early and it kind of opens up later on. And with games at home against Auburn, on the road against SMU, and then at home against Arizona State and Kansas State, those are big games, and those are four of your first six. And if Baylor were to start 2-4 again, I think that would be very disappointing to the fan base, and vibes wouldn't be high, even though they could be just as good as they were last year, even if they had a similar start. I really am looking for this team to start fast, and I was kind of glad you brought up some of the positional groups because I'm like on the positional group front, I'm really looking to see how the wide receivers pan out. They're pretty deep at wide receiver in terms of like the top two deeps on each wide receiver position is pretty good, but I really they're going to spread the ball around a lot, and I know they also have Michael Trigg as the tight end, and I'm really looking to see how the offense is going to evolve in year two under Spavital. He's a great play caller, and that really changed our season having Jake Spavital run the offense. But you as in today's world of college football, there's a lot of changes and a lot of new faces on every team, but particularly on Baylor and on the offense. And I'm really looking to see how those guys gel and mesh early in the year.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you saw the depth chart that was released earlier today, but they have Cole Wilson starting over Kobe Prentice, which I mean that goes to show how deep our wide receiver position is. Uh, but on the defensive side, for nose tackle, you got DK Kalu starting over guys like Adonis Freelo. I think I'm saying his name right, and then even Samu. He's third string, or I guess no, he's technically second string because Freelo and Samu are on that
Or
this or that. Yeah, the or.
yeah,
But yeah, I think that goes to show how much more depth this team has this year, especially at receiver and especially at nose tackle.
Well, and I was feeling the same way kind of when you were looking at the depth chart. To go back to the offensive side, when I looked at the quarterbacks, I saw that Walker White is fourth string
No,
because
technically
Edward Griffin and Nate Bennett
third.
are the for the two string. So that's second and third, and then White is the fourth string technically, and
Yeah.
that surprised me a little bit. But hopefully we don't see much of the backup quarterbacks this year.
Yeah, and I think to be fair to Walker White, I think he is technically the fourth string because he's still getting used to a new offensive scheme,
Right.
going from uh, I I don't know who Auburn's offensive coordinator is, over to Jake Spavital. So I mean that's two different offensive schemes you're gonna have to run. I think if I'm remembering this right, I think Auburn runs more of a pro scheme, if I'm not mistaken.
They got a new offensive coordinator this year.
Right.
It's Durbin, DK Durbin or DJ.
Oh, yes. Regardless, it was not spread.
Yeah.
That's yeah. So I think that's why he is considered the fourth string for now. Is you know until he gets more comfortable with the new offensive scheme. Um, I think he'll probably be the starter once Sawyer's gone, but obviously can't count out Nate Bennett at all.
Well, and you definitely don't want to put the offense in the hands of any freshman, whether it's, Edward Griffin or whether it's Nate Bennett or whether, any younger players, because you have an experienced quarterback in Sawyer Robertson, and you obviously lose a lot when you go lower in the depth chart in the quarterback room. But there were a lot of surprises on the depth chart for me, but that was certainly the one that stood out. The other one that stood out to me a little bit was Lewis Brown not being a starter. They've spoken really highly of him and his size and his ability to go up and get the ball. And I know that we have Ashton Hawkins, we have Josh Cameron, we have Cole Wilson and Kobe Prentice, but for Lewis Brown to be a second stringer, that surprised me a little bit. But we're early in the year, and I think they're going to swap out the receivers a lot. And I think everyone's going to get kind of like spread out touches. In fact, this is, I guess, maybe a hot take for me, but I really feel like Michael Trigg is going to be the number one target when the season gets to, kind of its climax and heating up. But at the same time, you really have to have, good wide receivers to play in the Big 12. I know a lot has been made over the years of the Big 12, making a return to form in defense, but there are a lot of spread out football teams in this conference still, and Baylor wants to score a lot of points and run tempo. And to do that, you have to have valuable wide receivers. So some surprises, but at the same time, we have a lot of depth at the receiver position, a lot of upperclassmen depth at the receiver position. And I hope that holds strong and that we're able to see the best from those guys this year.
Right. And again, that goes to show you how much more deep this team is this year. So that's also why I'm looking forward to how this team does with a tougher schedule. And like you said, how they do to start the season, because I mean if this team goes this team goes 4-0, I mean I think our expectations are a lot higher for this team. But if they were to start, let's say 2-2 or 1-3, um while I don't necessarily think going 2-2 to start the season is bad, especially with the teams that they play, it would be a disappointment to me. But going 1-3 would absolutely be like a disaster.
Well, and I think I agree with you because I think all of us have really high expectations. And I really think that if they started 1-3, it would be a lot of here we go again kind of stuff. And I really don't want the fan base, the team, the players to be in that position again. And I think we're not going to be there. I feel that way because I do think that part of the funk last year comes from starting Dequan Finn early in the season. I think that if Sawyer plays against Utah, maybe that's a little different. Um, but yeah, and early in the season we were struggling a little bit, and I certainly wouldn't want to get to a kind of start where there are hot seat questions. I mean, when we were going into the Texas Tech game, there was a lot made out of it, and even on this show about will Dave Aranda survive the rest of the year? And I really do think that chatter was pretty loud, even inside the building. So obviously, they boat raced Texas Tech, and they finished the year 6-1, finished the regular season 6-0, and we, have seen that momentum on the recruiting trail and in practice and with, getting to a big bowl game. But it's really time to seize that momentum and keep the positive vibes going forward.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't think this team is going to start off slow. Um, that's just something that, since we're going into the season, it's just, our expectations are a lot higher than they were going into last year. And also to piggyback off of, last season, obviously, finishing the season 6-0, not counting the bowl game, obviously, it's great. Part of that was because, the season did get a little bit easier. But I mean, despite that, though, I mean, we've got wins at a Texas Tech team that everyone thought was going to be really, really good last year. And then, beating TCU at home, same fashion as, the 61-58 game 10 years prior was awesome. And even we won our first game at West Virginia last year. So although the schedule did get lighter, it's not that it was like cupcakes and everything like that. But that's also part of why, I'm just like, okay, so now that the schedule has been ramped up and we're facing really good teams this year, how is this team going to do this year, especially given the big depth that we have this year?
Right. And I definitely winning your first game ever at West Virginia is a huge deal. Beating TCU is a huge deal because we have not played well against TCU over the years. And I really that was a really big game for us. And we brought out the throwback jerseys, and the team really responded, and that was a great win. And like you said, the Texas Tech win was huge because there was a lot of pressure going into that game, and the boys really played well, and especially on offense, and that was a big win. So to kind of pivot, what is the record you have for Baylor prediction wise going into this year?
I have Baylor going 10-2. The losses that I have are against Arizona State and at TCU. Arizona State, because I still think even without Cam Scatabo, um, I still think they're going to be a really good team this year, especially on offense. I mean, they've got two of the best wide receivers in the conference, Jordan Tyson and oh man, I'm drawing a blank on the other one, but I know that they still have really good pieces on offense, and their quarterback's going to be back this year. So yeah, I still think they're going to be good. Um, so I think Baylor's going to lose that game, and then at TCU because it's like we said, it's like what you said. We haven't really played well against TCU, and until I see this team actually like fare much better than they have, I'm I'm more inclined to not pick Baylor to beat them.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of in the same spot. I also have Baylor going 10-2, and I also have losses to Arizona State and TCU. I agree with you because I think Arizona State returns a lot, almost everyone except Scadaboo, um, especially the quarterback Sam Levitt, who is really good. And I definitely agree on the TCU thing. We haven't won at TCU since 2019, and we haven't played there historically anyway. Um, so
Should
I
have beat
look.
them in 21, but I digress.
Well, we didn't beat them in 21 because Gary Bohannon threw the last second interception, and we should
Right,
have. We
right.
should have. That was a tough one.
I was just
Um,
saying we should have, but
okay.
we were our own worst enemy that day.
Yeah, that was a tough one, and I just like you said, I'm gonna have to see it to believe it in some instances. I also think, and maybe this is just fodder. But I look at the Big 12 and I don't think anybody's going undefeated in the Big 12. The Big 12 is a really like competitive conference, and I just don't think anybody's going to walk through the Big 12. The conference is really good top to bottom, and there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this league. Um, and that's going to lead itself to really deep competition. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to, hopefully a very strong season from the Bears. But I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to Arizona State. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to TCU. Some other games of interest, I definitely look at the Kansas State game at home as another game that could be lost. Despite the loss to Iowa State, I do think Kansas State is really good. And as I watched that game, I was really impressed with their pass rush. They got to Rocco Becht a good amount, and the offensive line for us has been better and got better as the season went on. But I could see Kansas State posing some problems for us for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't necessarily think Avery Johnson, like, d- I think he's a good quarterback, but I wouldn't put him over, Sawyer or Sam Levitt or even Rocco Becht or Josh Hoover. I still think he's like all right, but I mean, I do agree that they're still going to be good this year. And then I think another game that could be a potential loss. And I referenced this earlier as a trap game is at Cincinnati. I think they're a team that's going to be playing a little bit desperate this season because Scott Satterfield, I think is that their head
Yep.
coach? Yeah, I think he's on the hot seat. And if they don't have a good year this year or at least make a bowl game, I think he's gone. So I think Cincinnati's going to be playing a little bit desperate this year just to make sure that he stays. And so I would say with that game, it's not something that needs to be overlooked. They're going to play their hearts out, and it's just something that we need to be prepared for so that way we don't lose that game.
Yeah, and on the trap game kind of vibes, I look at the Houston game as a possible trap game. I think Houston is going to be a lot better this year. There's going to be a lot of improvement there. Willie Fritz is a really good coach and usually gets his teams better, and they got better as the season went on, and they played us tough. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's a tougher game than we're kind of expecting at this moment, for sure. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and let's not forget they're only going to get better in 26 because they got Keyshawn Henderson, like the number 3 overall recruit.
yeah.
Yeah,
Willie Fritz has definitely got some momentum going in that program, and Houston is a sleeping giant in a lot of ways because there's so much recruiting, talent in the Houston area, and if you can just get some of those kids to stay home, not even all of them, but some of them to stay and play for Houston, that Houston is going to be a really challenging team to face, and they really are in a position to be a better program, especially now that they're in the Big 12.
yeah, I agree with you. I can see that as a trap game as well. I just think at Cincinnati is more of a trap game.
I see. Yeah, I definitely I can see that. I think both of them are kind of on that kind of par,
Yeah.
kind of sneaky games that could sneak up on you.
If Baylor does make the Big 12 championship game, then I could definitely see the Houston game being a trap game as well.
Right. And that could be a big deal because maybe late in the year Houston's having something to play for
Yeah.
too. So that a couple when in 21 we played Texas Tech in the last game of the year, and that we won that game by a field goal late. And
So Texas Tech missed a field goal. That's how.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of where I see the Houston game being kind of similar vibes to that one, where it's really close down to the wire, but Baylor pulls it out.
Right. Yeah, I could see that as well.
So definitely kind of to move forward. Um, let's go with what are your vibes for the Auburn game this weekend? How you feeling? I know we're both going to be there. How you feeling about this Auburn game? This is the biggest non-conference game that Baylor's had in quite some time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is a big one.
I'm very much excited for that game. I mean, it's blackout. We're bringing the gold chrome helmets back. There's a drone show at halftime. I think And I do want to talk a little bit of just a minute about, the uh what's the word I'm looking for? The game day experience, because I think this game is a good way of Baylor showing they're trying to make that, something, you know, improved on. And it's not that, it's been bad, but I know that there's always a way that you can improve something. And I know Baylor um, is really wanting to improve their game day experience. So I think adding that stuff in, especially for a big game like this, is, it's amazing to see.
Well, and it's really exciting. I think everything that Baylor Athletics has posted about this game in the weeks leading up to it has just ramped up my excitement more and more and more. And the drone show, the chrome helmets, the blackout, I mean, all of it is going to be super exciting, and vibes are going to be super high. Um, and I think that's part of the reason why, like, to go back to what we were talking about early in the show, that I was talking about starting fast, because the vibes are going to be exceptionally high for week one. And if you go out and kind of do what you did against BYU last year, where you get down by a lot early, I think that could like be a letdown for people. And I don't think any of us want to be let down like that this early in the season. Auburn's going to be a tough team. Of course, they're an SEC power. They're kind of dormant right now. They haven't been as good the last 2 years. They're 11-14 under Hugh Freeze. And I think Hugh Freeze is under a lot of pressure to win. But a lot of the stuff that I've seen tweeted out by Auburn accounts has not been great. There was that practice video of Hugh Freeze throwing down his visor and being all frustrated with Jackson Arnold. And there's the rumors or the scuttlebutt about him asking the defensive coordinator to take it easy on his quarterback. So, yeah, just not a lot of great vibes. I think I've seen more Auburn fans kind of suggesting that this is a gimme. And because they're in the SEC and because of their recruiting rankings and all that, that they have so much more talent that they should win this game. But I'm just not kind of sold on that yet. I'm going to have to see how it pans out. But I'm picking Baylor to win this game, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. What about you, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, spoiler alert, I mean, I'm definitely picking Baylor to win this game as well. But to me, I think this Auburn team is um this the same kind of team that Baylor found themselves in last year. They had a pretty down season in 24. Their coach is on the hot seat. They need to have a pretty decent season in order for Hugh Freeze to stay. So yeah, while I do see some similarities with this Auburn team than I did with the Baylor team last year, or at least going into the season. Now they do have some pretty good talent, especially on offense. I mean, they've got two really good wide receivers and Eric Singleton Jr., who transferred over from Georgia Tech, and then they have Cam Coleman. You can make the argument that Jackson Arnold has been very more miss than hit, but I do think that he needed more of a change of scenery. Now that video of that practice notwithstanding, I still think he'll be pretty decent at Auburn. But they also got two other transfers, Evan Daniels from Stanford, and then I can't remember who the other one was, but I know Evan Daniels is another one that could start. Obviously, if Jackson Arnold doesn't pan out, but I mean they've got talent. It's just how they utilize it.
Yeah, and I think Auburn had a lot of transfers come in, not just at quarterback, but in general. And I think
Yeah,
kind of like Baylor when they had so many transfers last year, they have a good amount of transfers again this year, but it's going to take time for that to mold. And I feel like Auburn, this is a game where Baylor is catching Auburn at the right time as opposed to catching them later in the season when they built some chemistry. So I'm excited about that. I would say, to speak on Jackson Arnold has all the talent and all the capability in the world. I think that he was kind of thrust into action early at Oklahoma, and that probably wasn't fair to him. But I think in the NIL world, we're going to see a lot more of when you pay big money for a quarterback, he's going to start. And we saw some of that in our own team last year. They gave a big high dollar amount to DeQuan Finn to come in, and he started until Sawyer proved that he was the guy. And that's been in other places too. I think Michigan paid a lot for Bryce Underwood, and Bryce Underwood's going to start as a freshman. And I just think that following the money is where you're going to see who starts at the beginning of the season for a lot of these college programs.
Yeah, I agree. And I was gonna say I do agree with you on the aspect of I'm glad we're playing Auburn at the beginning of the season than later on, because I think this is a team that could obviously you have to wait to see how if it should, but could gel a lot better and then just get better and better throughout the season. So that's why I'm glad that we're catching them very beginning of the season.
Yeah, I think it's much more favorable to play Auburn week 1 than it is to play them week 9 or week 10.
Yeah.
And the kind of the same thing, to not to veer off track, but for SMU as well. I think SMU as an early season game when they're still trying to work their kinks out on defense is a lot better than catching SMU late in the year where maybe they've gelled into their roles. And it'll be a big part of whether Baylor starts fast or not this year.
Yeah, and obviously we'll talk more about this next week when we play them, but I agree with that as well. Um, they still have Kevin Jennings, and they still got a lot of talent, but they did lose a lot of the talent that they had last year. So it's more of a. I'm glad that I'm glad that we're catching them very beginning of the season than later on, because I think if this game, same thing with Auburn, it's the same thing with SMU. If we were playing them like let's say week 9, week 10, I don't think we would win that game.
Right. Right. And I think Auburn will get better as the season goes on. Hugh Freeze is a good coach, and he has a track record of success. I think, while we're talking about Auburn, I think Auburn's problem is more Auburn and the alumni and the fan base and the administration than it is Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze was successful at Ole Miss and has proven that he can win in the SEC. I think Auburn steps on their own 2 feet a little bit, and kind of messes up what they have going. I wouldn't have fired Gus Malzahn. I think Gus Malzahn was really good for what Auburn wanted, and perennially went 9-3. And I know that in the SEC that's not good enough sometimes, but I think that had a lot to do with it. And I know that there was some scuttlebutt in the last coaching search about Kevin Steele getting the job, and us as Baylor fans know that that's probably not the move you want to make. But yeah, I think that if Baylor beats Auburn, the other thing is that the Auburn fan base, because of the toxicity and the nature around that could turn nasty, and we really could see a downward spiral from them if they don't pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and figure out how they're going to play after losing to Baylor. So I definitely think that it's an exciting game, and it's a big matchup, man. I mean, this is the biggest first game of the year for Baylor since Baylor played TCU in 2011. Full stop. I don't think you can pick out a better non-conference game on the schedule than that. And memory serves correct that TCU team was coming off a Rose Bowl, and that game launched the RG3 Heisman campaign. So it'd really be special if Baylor could do something similar. Of course, I don't know if you saw this, Chase, but RG3 will be in the booth for Fox College Sports. I know
I did see that, yeah.
we'll both be at the game, so we'll miss that. But really excited about this, man. I mean, this is a Fox primetime, nationally televised game, and it's just so exciting. I'm so excited for this. Vibes are so high. I'm going to wear my black Baylor jersey, and I'm going to be there in full support of the Bears, and I know you will be too. And maybe it's time to get into our college football, not playoffs, but our Power Four conference game predictions.
Okay, yeah. Well, one thing I do want to say before we get into that, since you brought it up, I really do think it's more Auburn's issue is their resources, which goes hand in hand with what you said. I think um now I know that, their NIL situation is, better than Baylor's, but I mean I think it's more just along the lines of how they utilize it. Because I do agree. I don't think it's a talent issue. I
Mhm.
don't think it's a head coaching issue because Hugh Freeze has already been at like two other schools and has won there in Ole Miss and Liberty. So it's really just how they utilize their funds and everything like that.
Oh yeah, and I think I'm glad we're kind of talking about this because Auburn's problem is Auburn. It's not Hugh Freeze. It's not Jackson Arnold. It's not, it's not the players. Auburn has gotten in the way of Auburn. And Auburn had a really good coach in Gus Malzahn. I know he didn't work out at UCF, but I still thought he was a very good coach for what Auburn was looking for. And sometimes you cut off greatness in search of something better. And I think that's kind of what they did. And, they could make me eat my words, very strongly. But I think that that's kind of the nature of being in the SEC sometimes too. And you want to win the SEC every year, but I don't know if Auburn is capable of being Alabama. And trying to hold yourself to that standard is incredibly tough. And sometimes, and we've learned this on this show, sometimes you have to have realistic expectations for where you're at.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just like, when we were going into last year, Baylor's biggest issue is Baylor. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And I really think, we saw a lot of that Baylor's biggest issue being Baylor in our season and the start to the season. There was a lot of chatter, there was a lot of upset fans, there was a lot of people. And I think Baylor still is working to get some fans back, even though we're talking about almost 10 years now since the scandal. Because some people are just not on the level of excitement that they used to be. And that's kind of where I think Baylor and Auburn are similar in some ways, is that Baylor's not ever going to be Texas. There was a period of time where we were much better than Texas, but I think it's hard to hold yourself to that standard. The same way Auburn's not going to be Alabama, and it's hard to hold yourself to that standard. So you got to have some realistic expectations for your football team. But at the same
Right.
time, we're both picking Baylor to go 10-2, and that would be a great season for the Bears. So
Yeah. I feel like if you're not a blue blood school, I mean, you have to find different ways to make sure that your school is a perennial winner. But I digress.
yeah, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. You got to find your lane, if that makes sense, and
Right.
stay in your lane. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think Baylor's lane, not to veer too far off subject, but Baylor's got to be a good offensive football team. I do think that that's part of it. I think you saw that when they brought in Jake Spavital to run a high octane up tempo offense, you saw a lot more excitement back in fans. And I was at the West Virginia game last year, and they beat West Virginia pretty good, and that was a pretty exciting football game.
Yeah.
And Baylor had struggled in West Virginia at that point. So I'm really excited about the offense. I'm really excited about the defense too. Um, I would say, the one thing I worry about in the Baylor Auburn game is Auburn has some really good receivers, and I think our biggest question is the secondary.
Yeah. It
Um,
is.
it definitely is, and but I do think that if Baylor can get pressure on Jackson Arnold, that will help out a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I'll say this one thing, and we'll go to our Power Four conference champ predictions. Um, I think our secondary has improved compared to going into last year, but it is still a question mark,
Yeah.
especially with Devin Turner's out for all season. I mean, we brought him over from Northwestern. He was the Big Ten. I know he was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, if I'm not mistaken. But he that's a big blow to our secondary. And then we brought in guys like Calvin Sampson Hunt. I mean, he didn't necessarily play a big role in Ohio State's championship season last season, but still, I mean, he was a top player out of high school, and so getting that kind of talent is still good. We got oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank again. Regardless, I mean, we've improved our secondary a lot. It's just still a question mark. But
Well,
again,
and
I digress. Let's get on to the champ
Well, and the
predictions.
last thing I'll say about the secondary is I also heard on Dave Aranda's press conference today, as we're recording on Monday, that Carl Williams will most likely not play. So
That's a big
that's
blow.
that's a big blow. But I think we're ready to do some conference championship picks. We'll save the Big 12 for last. So we'll go ACC, Big 10, SEC, Big 12. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so I'll start with the ACC. I'll say I've got Clemson and Miami, and I've got Clemson over Miami with Cade Klubnik being ACC Player of the Year. What about you?
I'm gonna go with the rematch of last year with Clemson and SMU. I know Miami got Carson Beck. I just don't know much about Miami to fully, pick them to play. So I'm gonna go with familiarity. And I know that SMU's lost a lot of talent, but I still think they're a contender in the ACC this year. But I'm going with Clemson repeating as champs again.
I like that. I'm going to take Clemson over Miami, like I said. Yeah, I definitely have Clemson. I'm not as high on SMU as a lot of people. I'm really worried about their defense. And I really think that Baylor's going to go into Dallas and really put it on them because that's what Baylor did when they faced teams with lackluster defenses in 2024. So, next, we're going to go to the Big Ten. Do you want to go first on this one since I went first last time?
Yeah, I'll go first. So for me, I'm gonna go with Ohio State and Oregon. I mean, those are two powerhouse schools. I mean, you can't really go wrong with Penn State making it. But until they actually win a big game, I'm not picking them.
Okay.
You can also go with, let's say someone like, as weird as this might say, Indiana. But again, I still think Oregon and Ohio State are like the number one and number two from that conference. That's not respectively. I'm just saying those are the top two teams from that conference. So I'm gonna pick them for my championship game, and I'm gonna go with Ohio State winning.
I am not as high as on Ohio State this year. I'm not as high as on Ohio State as you are. I'm going to go Penn State and Oregon, and I'm going to take Penn State to get over the hump and beat Oregon this year. That's probably going out on a limb a little bit because the history of Penn State is they do not win big games, but they have a pretty advantageous schedule and some games at home. I always think, and this is maybe a little off topic, but not all the way, that you want your tougher games to be at home and you want your road games to be a little easier. And I think Penn State's schedule kind of lines up that way. They've
Yeah.
got Nebraska at home, and I think Nebraska will be a sneaky team, but I like Penn State over Oregon. So next, we're going to move to the SEC. It's my turn to go first, and I'll say I've got Texas over Georgia in the SEC. I know Georgia's kind of a factory, but Texas is preseason number one. There's a lot of expectations there. They've got Arch Manning, who in limited duty has played really well. I'm ready for Arch Manning in Texas to take the next step, and I'm ready for that to be a big game. Or,
I also have Texas over Georgia. I will say this, and that's nothing against Arch Manning. Um, I don't necessarily buy the hype with him as of right now. I do think he's going to be a really good quarterback, especially on Sundays. But I mean, for now, I don't know if I would put him as my Heisman front runner, but I still think he's gonna have a really good year. And heck, he might make me eat my words, and I'm fully prepared for that. But I do think he's gonna be a good quarterback as the season progresses. I just don't buy into the hype right now.
Yeah, I'd say that I'm not ready to pick him to win the Heisman, but I am ready to pick him to have a really strong year.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that
all you Texas fans, I'm not saying that Arch Manning is going to be bad. I'm just saying for now, I'm tempering my expectations.
yes, but this is always a horns down podcast. All right, we want to stay there. All right, this is always a horns down
Fair
podcast.
enough. Fair enough.
All right, and last but not least, the Big 12. Uh, who have you got, Chase? Who's your Big 12 title game and champion?
I'm actually going to go with and I might sound like a homer right here. I'm going to go with the rematch of Baylor and Arizona State, although I think Baylor will come out on top.
So I'm picking Texas Tech and Baylor. This is one that I was really unsure about. But I'm not big on rematches in the Big 12, and I think Texas Tech's schedule, that early game where they play Utah, will tell us what we need to know about Texas Tech and Utah to a degree. But I think this is the year that Texas Tech kind of uh, clinches or capitalizes on the hype.
Yeah. And
So
I mean, you can't go wrong with any Baylor, Arizona State, Utah, Texas Tech, to a lesser extent BYU. But I mean, when it comes to Texas Tech, I do think they'll have the best defense in the Big 12. Uh, I'm just wondering how their offense is going to be with Baron Morton. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a good quarterback. I'm just given
he's
what
gonna
we
have to
saw
stay
last
healthy.
year. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I don't necessarily buy into the hype with Utah, especially with Devon Dampier. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I get that, I mean, he was a good quarterback at UNLV. But as we saw last year with DeQuan Finn, just because he was good in a smaller conference doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate well to a bigger conference. And that's not to say Dampier's going to have the same fate. I just don't buy into it right now.
And I totally agree on that. I'm actually pretty out on both Utah and BYU. I know BYU's schedule is really advantageous for them to be good, but a freshman quarterback going into the Big 12, I just don't have a lot of faith in that. And I also am kind of questionable on Devin Dampier. I know there's a lot of hype surrounding him, and I know that a lot of people said that Utah didn't have a quarterback last year and give him a quarterback and see what happens. But I'm I'm not that high on Kyle Whittingham at this moment. I think he's getting towards the end of his coaching career, and I just Utah fans may come after me for that, but that's why we do this podcast, man.
Yeah.
If my takes are bad, you can always come find me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I know that they have like that, I think it's Spencer Fano. I think that's his name. That's the lineman that's supposed to go top 5 in the draft. So I
Yeah.
mean, they do have talent. I'm just given what happened last year, and I know, it's the question of if they had a quarterback, they would have, had a much better season. But even with that, I'm just like, what's going to happen with Utah this year? I don't know.
Well, yeah, and I think we are the ones who knocked out their quarterback,
Yeah,
but they had
true.
a quarterback who was made of glass. So that if we hadn't done it, someone else would have done it.
Yeah,
So
which was unfortunate. Though,
right.
let's be clear on
You
that.
never want to see anybody get hurt, but I definitely that was a situation where that quarterback in question had been hurt a lot, and you were really putting all your eggs in that basket. I'm not sure that was a wise decision.
Right? Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, so we're gonna close out with just a couple games of the week. I'm gonna start with the big game, Texas at Ohio State. I'm going to take Texas over Ohio State. We're a little early in the week for a spread, so we're just going to pick these games straight up. And I got Texas over Ohio State. What about you, Chase?
You really can't go wrong with either team. For me, I'm actually going to go with the home team, with Ohio State. And again, it's not that I don't think Arch Manning's going to be good. I just, with his lack of experience playing at such a big stadium as Ohio Stadium, I mean, that's a tall task, especially for a team that's number one. So I'm going to go with Ohio State. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a great game, but I think Ohio State's going to pull it off.
Definitely think it has the potential to be a great game.
Yeah.
I like the thought process you have about Arch Manning. He had, that's going to be a big road test in a tough environment. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes either way. Next, we're going to go with Clemson and LSU. Chase, I'm going to let you go first this time. Who you got?
I'm going to go with LSU in this game. Um, I don't necessarily Cade Klubnik, I think is a good quarterback, but I think he's just too inconsistent. Is it at LSU or is it neutral site? I can't remember.
Ooh, I thought it was at Clemson. So,
Or it could be Clemson. Hold on. I got this. Hold, 1 second. It's I just saw it. Oh no. It is at Clemson. Um I'm still picking LSU on this just because I don't trust Kate Klubnik enough um, in such a big game. And given that Garrett Nussmeier is s- still at LSU and he's got loads of weapons, I'm going with Clemson.
um, I'm going to pick Clemson. Um, I'm Clemson's at home. I am probably wrong for feeling this way, but I got more faith in Klubnik than I do Brian Kelly and Nussmeier. I just think that Brian Kelly is kind of a hard coach to play for, and I'm not really sure I would want to play for him if I was getting recruited. So I'm going to take Clemson here, and that's partly due to the home field advantage. That should be a big game, though. We're going to pick two more non-Baylor games. We're going to start with um, Notre Dame at Miami. Miami fans still have not sold out this game as the recording of this podcast. Yep. That was my reaction too.
It's
So
Catholic
for
versus
that,
convicts. Why is it
right,
not?
right. Where? I will call out the Miami fan base for that. You have got to show up for this game, man. This is a big game, and like I know you and I are from another generation where Catholics versus convicts was a big deal, and where the U and Notre Dame faced off in big time matchups. But like, gotta sell out this game, man. So I'm taking Notre Dame on the road. I don't know if that'll be that hostile of an environment. So yeah, give me Notre Dame in this one.
I'm gonna go with Notre Dame as well. Um, I I know Miami has Carson Beck. I know that they're still gonna be a good team, but I do think their offense is at least gonna take a little bit of a step back, going from Cam Ward to Carson Beck. And with that being said, I think Notre Dame's the more rounded team, so I'm going with the Fighting Irish.
I'm also a Carson Beck non-believer, so we can host that club together. The last game I wanted us to pick before we pick the Baylor game is Georgia Tech and Colorado, and that game actually opposites Baylor. So neither you and I will watch that live. Um, I just think that this is an interesting matchup. And it'll be interesting to see how Colorado fares without Travis Hunter and Shador Sanders. I know they have the Liberty transfer at quarterback and a five-star freshman. So
Caden
we'll see who.
Salter.
Kate, that's exciting. I'm very excited for Colorado because personally I want Colorado to stay relevant because it's good for our conference. Um, I know that Georgia Tech was a kind of like us was a team that came on strong in the second half of the year. Um, give me Colorado. Give me Colorado and a little bit of an upset. Give me Coach Prime. Give me the Buffaloes. What about you?
I'm of the proponent that if this game was being played later in the year, then I think Colorado's going to win this game. But I'm picking Georgia Tech. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think Georgia Tech is still very much well rounded. I think they ride that momentum throughout the season in 2025 that they had from last year. And I think the start of that comes from this game. So I'm going with the Yellow Jackets.
All right. We got a couple that we differ on, so that's good. Finally, It's Baylor, it's Auburn. It's a blackout, it's a night game, it's chrome helmets, it's drone show at halftime, it's nationally televised on Fox. Who you got, Chase? What's your score? Sick 'em Bears, man.
Before I make that prediction, we're forgetting one other one. TCU at North Carolina. And
Ooh.
I'm just going to make a rapid fire prediction on that one. I'm going with UNC on that one.
Ooh, so I'm gonna flip it on you, and I'm gonna say I don't trust Bill Belichick. I've heard there was a lot going on in that program over the summer that was distraction worthy.
Fair
Give me
enough.
TCU. That's a quick one. But to set it up, we're all now ready for Baylor and Auburn. Who you picking, Chase? What's the score? What do you think?
So as I alluded to earlier, I think if this game was played later in the season, I think this one would be a lot more in Auburn's favor. But I think it's the fact that this is week one. We've got Sawyer Robertson back. We've got pretty much almost everyone from last year's team back, minus a few players. The Ashton Hawkins situation has been finally settled, and on top of that, we just don't know much about Auburn because they had replaced so much talent, and with their quarterback situation being the way it is, even with the great receivers, I don't know much about this Auburn team to fully to say, okay, they could pull off the upset. So, with that being said, I think Baylor is going to win this game. I think Auburn's going to keep it close, but I think in the end, I think Baylor wins this game by 10. Give me Baylor over Auburn. Let's go with 35-25.
Okay. I'm going to have the game a little closer. I'm going to have Baylor over Auburn 35-31. I think that Auburn's wide receivers will show some mismatch problems for our secondary, but I do think Sawyer and the boys get it done. I think it'll be a huge early season win for the Bears. We'll all celebrate on the Brazos, the biggest non-conference win in 14 years for the Bears. So give me Baylor over Auburn for sure. Sick 'em Bears, man. Sick 'em
Yeah,
Bears.
sick 'em Bears all day. Yeah, this is gonna be a great game.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for our show today. We're going to say Sick 'em Bears one more time and later, guys.
All right, sick 'em Bears. Thanks for coming, guys.
Sick 'em Bears later, guys.